Thank you all for joining us today for this discussion of the Community Reinvestment Act and how it might present an opportunity for communities to further grow their capital stack for broadband investment. So first, I just want to start and say some of you may be asking, what is the Community Reinvestment Act? It's often also called, in short, CRA. The Community Reinvestment Act, or CRA, is one of a series of civil rights statutes, and it was signed back in 1977 as a response to redlining. Now, for those who aren't familiar with this term, redlining refers to the denial of credit or financial services to entire groups and communities based on income or race. Historically speaking, redlining is responsible for the creation or contribution to persistent poverty that has really severely limited the building of intergenerational wealth and assets by certain communities, particularly communities of color. And so the CRA was enacted as this set of rules to encourage banks and lenders to invest in community development initiatives, to partner with community organizations, and just generally increase public transparency around their lending and investment practices to make sure that that is happening equitably. So why are we talking about CRA today in the context of this moment in broadband? Well, the Appalachia Digital Accelerator Program here at Connect Humanity is working with communities and stakeholders across more than 70 geographies to develop broadband and digital equity plans. One of the aspects of this work is to identify eligible sources of funding to underwrite the costs of implementing those plans. And as is the case with many areas of the country and some parts of Appalachia, will not be eligible for BEAD funding. There might be previously allocated funding, even if it's likely to default, and that's a whole other story. There could be discrepancies in broadband availability with poor maps from the FCC and more. And so it's for this reason that we really want to ensure that we're not leaving any opportunities or funding sources on the table, right? We want to make sure communities understand the full spectrum of funding sources that they can cobble together for a strategy. So it's with this context, I'm super excited to introduce you to my colleague and friend, Jordana Barton-Garcia. Jordana is a senior fellow here at Connect Humanity, and she's also the principal of Barton-Garcia Advisors. Her many achievements, and I'd need a longer webinar to list them all, but they've contributed greatly to the field of community development and really just digital inclusion broadly, and certainly have been critical to the development of CRA. Jordana, thank you so much for joining us today. Can you tell us, just to kick us off on one, why don't you tell us a little bit about why you are so passionate about CRA?
Thank you, Sam. It's so good to be here and with this great group and the work that you're doing. And it is timely to introduce CRA into the mix of what communities are looking towards for the funding of their broadband networks and their digital equity work in general. And like you, I'm the communities that I'm working with very directly, I'm having them expand their funding base as well, because we want to go for the federal grants always. And we're going to look at some of the ways you can put those packages together, but always diversify, right? So no, it's great to be here. Very timely. The CRA modernization rule just came out in the fall. It's going to be implemented in April, and so some great improvements for digital equity in the CRA. And so I look forward to talking to the group about those improvements and what they really the opportunity they provide for them and for communities across the nation. The fact that CRA was strengthened in the Community Reinvestment Act, in the actual rule. So it's been since 1995 since the agencies that regulate banks under the CRA it had revised the rule. There's been some guidance that has come out, and we'll talk about that. But the rule is now includes digital inclusion as part of the primary purpose of CRA, and that's very important, which we'll talk about.
That's incredible, Jordana. Yes, back in 77 when it was originally, enacted, following that, there's been some smaller incremental changes and updates to include lending practices to small businesses, to farms and community development services. So exciting that Broadband has made that list now. Can you talk about what is significant about the latest updates that are coming into being enacted in April?
Mm-hmm. And we can probably put up the slide. Thank you so much, Sarah. And we had an update in 2016, which was very important. And Sam, that's when I got to meet you and people in the field, of digital inclusion more broadly. We had an update in 2016 where we included I was with the Federal Reserve at the time, the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, and we were working on the CRA guidance with the Board of Governors and the interagency group, the OCC and the FDIC. And we included broadband as essential community infrastructure, but it wasn't until the modernization, we couldn't put it into the community development definition, but it did fit in under one of the categories in the community development definition. And the significance now is that broadband is kind of woven throughout the community development definition, and it is under certainly essential infrastructure as well as community services, and so areas like digital equity programs are included, digital workforce development, and then. And CRA was never meant to be very prescriptive, although this is so great to have it in the final rule. But we also know how CRA impacts kind of many areas of community development. So that's real important for communities to know too. But what's really great now is that we could have a kind of revitalization of CRA, because CRA is about banks meeting their obligations in communities, and really using community development finance and grant making and philanthropy, and bringing in partners to do what we call finance for good, right? So that is very important. And CDFIs, community development financial institutions, are important for that. CDFIs that are credit unions, minority serving institutions, all of those institutions play a real important role in CRA, which we're going to talk about. But right now, the most important people in the mix are communities, nonprofits, public entities, all coming together with banks and CDFIs to meet their economic development goals, their goals for the well-being of their communities in all the ways that we can with CRA.
So I just want to make sure we're crystallizing this for our audience. Who is able to give out CRA funding? Number one.
Yes, that's a great question. And the fact is that any nonprofit, anyone with any entity with a 501c3 status, public entities are essentially nonprofits, and they can also receive funds. Schools, as governmental entities, and local governments and county governments and so forth, and a variety of nonprofits. So and of course, CDFIs are partners with banks, right? So banks can make community development investments and grants and other into community loan funds, and CDFIs have that function, right? Of many of them are revolving community loan funds, or they're doing affordable housing and technical assistance with communities. So they can receive funds from CRA and then in turn lend them in the community, which they're experts at. And so that is the beauty, right, of the system that we have in this country to work alongside the market economy, where you have banks investing in CDFIs and other community loan funds, like and technical assistance providers like Connect Humanity is where we are right now with the development of Connect Humanity, and other nonprofits. So yeah, it's a wonderful opportunity, certainly for the group, when I looked at the different organizations that they come from.
So just to recap, it sounds like the CRA funds come through banking institutions, lending institutions, and are able to be provided to different types of local government and nonprofit NGOs. Is that roughly
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
So who else are the players, right? You mentioned these CDFIs. We certainly have referenced banks, and then we talked about all of these different local stakeholders. You know, who are the major players around CRA, and how can they help communities to finance the broadband plans?
Yeah, so um, we talked about some of the players. Let's look at what banks do under CRA. So they can do lending and community development investments, like that I mentioned, into loan funds or CDFIs, and they provide services to uh, low and moderate income communities, rural communities, and low to middle income rural communities, right, and tribal communities. So those are the targeted um, focus, right, of CRA, those communities. And you know, the intention, right, is to build community assets to break the cycle of poverty, which I started with that, you know, that slide of persistent poverty that you all are very familiar with. But that didn't just happen by accident, right? Uh, it was the result of systemic programs, you know, government programs that excluded through redlining, as you noted, people from having equal access to building assets, right? And how do you pass on intergenerational wealth? It's with by passing on assets to the next generation, right? So if you create that over many years, you know, and persistent poverty, the definition is at least 3 decades under the 20% poverty line. 20% or more of the population is under the poverty line. And then we have this in the country, right, where we have 5 regions that are persistent poverty. You working with our colleagues in Appalachia and then Mississippi Delta. We're also working with, and I work directly with the Texas-Mexico border, and then of course areas of Indian country. And so we can go back to the next slide. So the purpose of CRA is to address just that. And banks can lend directly in those communities, and they can also invest in community loan funds and other nonprofits, intermediaries, and make capital available so that communities can uh, function and build assets, and we can, you know, banks also, you know, they can, in any area that's fits with the primary purpose definition of CRA. So let's look at the definition of CRA in the next slide. And now, community broadband and digital equity are directly in the primary purpose definition. I'll refer you to a blog that I have on Connect Humanity's Connect Humanity blog that kind of gives you more details, which you can look back at. But it's firmly there. And then of course, many areas that had already been included, which is essential community infrastructure, is an area that a community can come together and work with banks and CDFIs to invest in their community, whether it's water, broadband, or other, you know, drainage and so forth. Those all fit. Access to financial services, that this includes, you know, like LISC, one of the largest CDFIs in our country. I think the largest, probably. And they are a partner of Connect Humanity, and they have programs where they work with their communities uh, in at once, building their digital skills through their digital navigator programs and so forth, but at the same time, building their financial literacy, right? And knowing how to access banking services online safely and securely. All those, they work it in together. Uh,
That sounds
as
great.
Mhm,
I want to like almost wind us back a little bit because there's so much to parse in there.
mhm,
First of all, we started with what is the form that this funding can come in, and you said a couple of things that I want to make sure everyone understands. You said loan funds, funds that can be pooled into community development financial institutions. That's the CDFI function, and you also mentioned grants. Can you talk
mhm.
just about what are the differences of those things just discreetly? We
Yeah.
can start with how does CRA provide funding to CDFIs? Like, what is a CDFI and how do they get that funding?
So CDFIs, it can be an investment in the loan fund where they get a minimal rate of return, and then the CDFI lends it out in a revolving loan fund, or it can be just a grant into the loan fund that the bank does not get a return. And also banks provide support for programs, technical assistance programs. In the case of some CDFIs now, like LISC, who are doing digital equity work, they can support those programs as well through grants um, because that's essential to their work as well. So, and other community organizations that are part of this community development ecosystem in any community can also receive grants directly
Okay.
uh,
So you're saying
under.
that the money can be provided either as a grant or as a loan, and those things can be delivered either directly from the bank providing the CRA funds, or they can funnel them through a CDFI or other loan fund. Is that right?
A CDFI, other loan fund, or a nonprofit if they're
Ah,
supporting their
okay.
community services. So if you'll see small, these are some typical areas of CRA, our focus areas of CRA, including small business development, affordable housing, community services. So under community services, many organizations, maybe they're a healthcare organization and they're providing uh, telehealth and access to healthcare, and they want to apply to a bank for a grant. So what you need to think of banks as, right? They have their philanthropy arm and their CRA finance arm and general, loan, services, uh, and they try to integrate and work together, right, to complement. So, like when I was a CRA banker for a large national bank, Capital One, uh, I would finance affordable housing. Through very, very low interest loans that I could make to develop those, and then I would support the affordable housing developer or public housing developer with grants and layer that. So if they
Mm,
had services for the families in a housing development for digital literacy, I could also layer in grants for that, and that's seen by the regulators that evaluate banks uh, as more innovative, right? Because you're being more holistic in your approach, and
great.
you're so that's a very important part of
I
CRA.
love that. So let's
Mhm.
let's highlight and underscore that. That means banks are given extra brownie points for giving not just a low interest rate loan, but also a grant. That's amazing.
Yeah,
Where would people go to find these CDFIs? Are they easy to find? Are they in your neighborhood? Are they larger national presences? How do
they're
people
hidden.
find them?
They're hidden in plain sight. uh, no, I think the best way for communities, and the ones that I have seen, the nonprofits and of course CDFIs and local governments that I've seen most effective. Um, Invite the banks in to their economic development or community development efforts.
Mm,
And if you need, when I was on the nonprofit side, CDFI side,
hear
I
that.
would go in with perhaps an elected official, right, or the mayor, or it didn't have to be at that level, but it could be somebody responsible for economic development. One of the other things banks, and including in the new modernization, that banks are asked to under CRA to work with the regional plans and local economic development plans. The IIJA, that is an economic development plan, and that is something that banks should be working with communities on. So invite them into the conversation. What tools do you have? And hopefully we'll get to some of the great tools that they have uh, for community development finance and grant making, and invite them to the table. It's very much like cultivating any philanthropy or any entity that you want to work with, right? They have to get to know you. Now, the agencies try to help banks come together in CRA roundtables.
Mm,
Uh, Not everybody is quite as effective, right, in getting in all communities with, bringing their banks together. So what I would like people to know is that the CRA belongs to the people, and that's how it's going to be strong. And the activists who fought in the 70s for this very important piece of civil rights legislation, it's going to only be uh, the agencies have done their best, right, to update it and listen to community input, and we chimed in with all of our national partners about what we wanted to see, and we saw some great things which we'll talk about. Uh, but
I love that.
but communities inviting them in to these discussions, making sure they're at the table,
Absolutely.
and that you're looking to them.
You know, we've talked a lot about our community stakeholders convening and reaching out to stakeholders through the lens of broadband planning on this project. And I want to start taking us down a fork in the road. We're going to like kind of create a fork and talk about infrastructure, because the idea of what finance looks like for infrastructure is going to be way different from financing digital equity programming. So let's start with infrastructure. This is something that everyone's thinking about, and they're figuring out, like, what is it that we want? What do we want to advocate for as a community? And where are our points of leverage? And I know that there's a lot of ISPs out there that are looking to communities to provide matching funds and other things like that. Can you talk about how CRA fits into the infrastructure conversation, particularly around BEAD, which is the big elephant in the room?
Yes, yes. So next slide, I think will help us, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So and let's start with infrastructure, and the ways that banks and CDFIs that are credit unions, these all receive funds. The CDFIs, whatever form they take, minority serving institution or bank, large bank, intermediate bank, local banks, right? They have some different obligations under CRA, but they this is how they can come into the capital stack to build your infrastructure network. And Connect Humanity has done some great ones and in the short time that it has existed. And this is one of them, where in Alabama, where Connect Humanity partnered with Macon County EDA, Rural LISC, and Point Broadband was the ISP to invest in rural broadband. So you can see the capital stack and how the different entities came in. So Connect Humanity receives funds from banks because of its purpose. It's a community loan fund. And so does LISC, certainly. And then you see the other partners that come to the table. So the ISP itself had a stake in the game. Utilities board, so these public entities, right, that have an economic development mission, came in with some funds, and state grants and federal grants. So this is a very typical mix of what you're trying to put together to fund your network. So say the federal grant, the federal and state grant portion, 35% plus 12%, right? Could
Mhm.
be a BEAD grant, you know, uh, and then your other entities come in, and that makes you look very sophisticated and like, oh, we want to invest in them. They know their stuff, right? They have others who are contributing. So this is a good example of how to, you know, how to have banks come in and CDFIs come in under CRA for digital equity
Just
and
to
B.
be clear, the rural LISC grant of 8% in this stack, that's where the CRA funds are. Is that right?
That's certainly true, and Connect Humanity as well receives funds under
Okay,
CRA,
great.
because it's a loan fund. And maybe, you know, maybe the utilities board, you know, we don't know, but you know, probably not that one. But you sometimes you have economic development entities, right, that also receive funds. So and sometimes it's a bank directly, and which we'll try to look at some of those as well. And we'll put them at least on our website if we don't get to everything today. So the next slide, that's another one that is about the infrastructure. So this is a messy slide, but the city of FAR on the Texas-Mexico border that I've worked with since I was at the Federal Reserve was in NDIA's worst connected city 2018, and it just on the worst list, right? And they're in a persistent poverty region, you know, very, very high poverty. And their school district serves over 83 colonias. And colonias are, so their county, Hidalgo County, is over 20% poverty rate for the last 3 decades. So definitely persistent poverty. But colonias are where hundreds of thousands of people live in our country with substandard housing and lack of access to basic infrastructure, including broadband. Uh, and uh, and so um, the colonias are like double that, at least over 40% under the poverty line, and many more at or near poverty, 64% or so. So very high poverty area. So, and they had, you know, we had talked about the different options, you know, municipal ISP or public-private partnership, all the different options that they could use to get what they needed. And this is the capital stack that they ended up with. So the first grant was $100,000 from PNC Bank, which was VA Compass at the time. And so they did their strategic engineering and feasibility study, right, which tied their economic development goals and community development goals with the design of the network. And it gives you the financials and everything else, right? It tells you, it helped them decide what they wanted to do and which ownership model they wanted to use. Then when ARPA came down, well, they were ready because they already had their plan, and they had already investigated, and they had studied, you know, higher income communities that had done municipal broadband, and they wanted to do the same. They felt like they wanted to be owners rather than renters. They felt that they could, you know, they knew all the risks and they knew all the benefits, and they made a decision, and they took it to the voters too. So it was very much a community decision. And they put ARPA funds, made a municipal bond, 47 million, that was a bulk, right? And then a local philanthropy that's owns the Methodist healthcare system, and I helped create this area of work, digital equity, because I worked with MHM, and they provided $1 million for the last mile connection. So from everything from the infrastructure itself to the customer premise equipment. And that the total cost was 60.1 million. And
Wow.
yeah, so they put it together. Now they've been so successful, they already finished almost all the network, but they had to add another of the some housing developments developed since they started, you know. And so now they need 20 more million. So that'll go under BEAD and CRA and other, you know, they're going to look for another kind of capital stack for that 20 million.
Yeah.
But but they've already they just finished this 2023, and they already signed up at least 4,000 residents, and many more are on the waiting list. So they're getting them connected as quickly as they can. They started, Sam, this is so important and tells you why it's so important to have a mix of types of ISPs, because they started with South Far, which is a colonia that they actually incorporated into the city, the very lowest income part of the city, Las Milpas, the colonia, and they started there. The mayors and the superintendent said, we're going to start there and we're going to serve them first. Uh, and so very, very great, principles for covering the least served. And so it's worked for them. We have a lot of great outcomes, like just the job creation of tech jobs from who they've had to hire, have building the skills and the permanent tech jobs that have been created there. The permanent tech jobs, they've hired about 25, personnel, and trained, them, and for
Want
the
to go
help
back
desk.
to
Mhm,
some of the CRA parts, though. I mean,
mhm,
it
mhm.
sounds like it's such a great project and use of this. And I'm just thinking of many of our grantees and our communities and counties that are doing outreach within, county level is predominant, some cities
Mhm.
as well. But they're reaching out to local stakeholders, the social service sectors, the, community anchor institutions to identify a broadband planning team. Should they be reaching out to, say, the banks in their region, or do you just walk into a branch and say, hey, who do I talk to about CRA? Or is there an office? Do they have regional presence? Like, how do they start reaching out and bringing them into this strategy group?
So I think it should be a process of, definitely, going in, being at events where the banks, might be, and it's banks and CDFIs, let's not forget, to include them in the mix. And there are some great ones in the Appalachian region in general, but the banks, of all levels, and then there's something else very important in the new modernization that's very important for persistent poverty regions, and that is that in addition to making broadband and digital equity part of the primary purpose definition, the regulators changed that large banks. So these are your Capital Ones, your Chase, your Citi, those very large, Bank of America, PNC. Let's see, who else is a very large bank? We can provide you with a list of those, also reaching out to them, because now they used to have to just give where their branches were, but now, there were some exceptions made, like for natural disaster and other uh very, very few exceptions. Well, now it's opened up, and those large
Wow.
banks can contribute, can participate in lending anywhere, and that's a recognition of banking, right? That many of these are internet banks, and it can serve everywhere. So persistent poverty regions are one area that the agency said you can contribute there, you can be invest there, because you'll be meeting your purpose under CRA, and so very
Huge.
important.
So basically, what you're saying, Jordana, is not just invite your neighborhood bank potentially to the table, but you can open up and reach out to any large bank that you might want to partner with or have a contact with. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yes, and so, look at your institutions that are at the table now, like Appalachian Regional Authority, the different officials with the different COGs, the councils of governments, and counties. They will have connections. They might not have partnered with them well, for sure, Appalachian Regional Authority has, but some of them might not have partnered yet, but they will be in those networks, and they can help you invite them to the table.
So I want to talk a little bit about what can these funds be used for. I'm sure they're because they might people on the call might be thinking, what is my ask, right? What am I
Mhm.
asking banks to fund? Should they be going for capital costs, for matching funds, for gap financing in between multiple projects, or like
Mhm.
what kind of things are eligible uses of CRA funds, or is there a way to be thinking about this?
Yeah, so in the plans that the communities in this accelerator program are doing, right, is the plan to expand broadband networks and bring a digital equity, right? The three legs of the stool of digital inclusion. That's perfect for banks, period, because they can either lend or make grants in any of those areas. Think about the NTIA, and I'm sure you all are looking at their guide for digital workforce development and what's needed.
Mhm.
Workforce is a huge part of CRA, so contributions to those efforts can come from banks, as well as CDFIs can be involved in the mix as well. Um, CDFIs generally are not grant making institute, although some of them, like the huge CDFIs, do a wide range of work, which includes grants in many cases, and but you might look to them more for the financing side, but ask, right, ask what role can you play, and start identifying roles that they can play. And I mean, Donna Gambrell, the amazing, she's a legend in community development, and runs the a huge CDFI, right? And she could be a guide or a resource too to help you. She ran the CDFI fund, which is a huge fund that invests in CDFIs and makes capital available to them to do their work. So out of treasury.
That's amazing. So I want to switch gears and talk about digital equity now. You mentioned digital equity as being one of those topics and the three legs of the school that are perfect for banks. So how might a community or stakeholder access or use CRA funds to support, say, the meaningful adoption and use of internet by residents, so more direct to resident programming?
Yeah. So um the in the same way. So the puzzle that you all are putting together is is certainly the infrastructure piece, partnering with ISPs, and or some might choose to take the path of FAR or other public-private partnerships, very formal partnerships, right? And you're combining that with digital equity programs, digital navigator programs, digital workforce development, all the way up the ladder of opportunity with digital skills, since you can't do workforce development now, right? When most jobs require digital skills and more advanced digital skills. So that all fits it, and it fits like you would cultivate any funder. Uh, and what you provide is this ability to be innovative. In other words, you can not only would you be able to finance a great project, but you could also support that in being successful by helping with the adoption and the digital skills training, digital navigator program training, and that that is very important under CRA. And I would take things with you, like even the blog, the Connect Humanity blog, talking about the modernization or the modernization itself. We have links to all that in the blog. And you'll see the CRA letter that the community came to write to influence, broadband being stronger in the CRA. All of that is good evidence, right? Like I had communities in 2016, when we made changed the guidance, and broadband was included as part of broadband, and digital equity were included as part of CRA under the guidance. I had published Closing the Digital Divide, which you'll see on the last slide as we go forward. But people were taking that booklet to the banks, and they were showing them how that they could work with them, right, to support what they were doing. So
I
like Senior Planet Oats, right? I mean, they told me that their finance guy had it tattooed on his leg or something. That, but bottom line, take every resource that you can and say, these are the opportunities we're looking for with you. We want to know what is your plan around CRA, and how can this fit in, and cultivate them like you would cultivate any partner or funder. So, but take those guides with you. Take the resources with you, and then economic development people, right, in your community that are kind of officials are also good to have in the mix. And Sam, you and I have talked about having some CRE roundtables is that we can,
love to do
in
that.
the
Yeah.
communities to help. And then with the regulators, right, inviting them to the table with the community groups that are part of this accelerator, um, as well, right, to foster relationships. But the nonprofits that have been most successful, so Oat Senior Planet went from being in New York City to partnering with Capital One Bank, an amazing program for seniors, digital skills building and financial education, access to financial services, as well as Citi and others became their biggest funders. And they really cultivated it by, just explaining, even, so don't assume the banks are up to date, because the regulators have said we're going to be training, and all of us in digital equity have volunteered to help. Um, and so we'll see how we work together. But you're
Yes.
sometimes you're the first teacher, you're the first communicator about how important it is to economic development in your region, and to low income people's ability to prosper and find financial stability.
It's such a great empowering note that you just said, that this is really the role of the communities to bring people to the table and to really vocalize what is important. I'm wondering, I want to connect to a little bit of a current event happening here. A lot of our communities, and really people everywhere across the country, have been really tracking the likely loss of ACP coming through. FCC has rolled out guidance. A lot of the ISPs have distributed notices that the program is stopping, and we know that millions of people across the country are going to soon lose this $30 a month subsidy. I'm wondering if CRA funds can be used for affordability programs, and if this is something that people should be looking for as a lifeline for that inevitable loss.
Yeah, definitely for affordability programs in
Mhm.
general. So, well, and it's interesting, well, because we knew ACP as yet was just temporary, right? Because it wasn't fully funded, right? And we wanted a permanent universal service for broadband that we need, as a gap measure for but also the fact that many of your organizations are going to probably have a success in doing this right. One of the things, like you saw with FAR, so FAR had surveyed their lowest income communities, and all, their whole community, but what would be a an amount, right, that we could charge that would work for you and your family balance sheet. And the lowest income community said $25. And so they have a $25 plan for 500 symmetrical. And then they made a deal with the school district, got major funds in for 10 years, that they're going to cover all the students, all the low income students in the school district. So there are all kinds of things that you can do, and banks can support school district programs. And as far as affordability, device access programs, it was a very important piece of the affordability puzzle. So definitely, in fact, I didn't put it in the capital stack, but Capital One and BBVA, which became PNC, gave grants. 100,000, certainly Capital One's was 100,000 for device access programs back then when they first started,
Wow.
right? So for sure, those are programs. And when we saw ACP come out here at Connect Humanity, I was like, well, what are they doing for small business, right? Micro enterprise, very, very small businesses and small business who haven't digitized, right? And we have a problem in persistent poverty regions. We already see it with the latest Department of Labor data that small businesses actually employ over half of our workforce, right, in the US. Very
Donna, I
important.
am getting goosebumps as you're talking because I'm thinking about Appalachia and how they're I've heard so many times that they're interested in growing a digital economy to improve and expand workforce opportunities through connectivity. And this sounds like such a great alignment with that concept.
Most definitely. We need to create new pathways into the middle class. They know this, right? We've lost certain jobs, right? And we need to create new pathways. And digital skills are the way to do it, because you need that for people, right? Like my brother dropped out of school. We grew up in a colonia in South Texas, and then he worked a middle skills job in the oil rigs, and then he went to community college, then university, and then to medical school. He's given millions, in taxes, right? Paid millions in taxes, a very productive citizen, but we could have lost him there because he
Oh,
had dropped out if he didn't have that middle skills job, right? So everything that your communities are preparing, the digital skills training and all that, at all levels, from the very beginning, you don't have to worry. People will do it themselves. Just
yeah.
provide it, right? From the very basic digital navigators, some of those are going to become IT professionals and so forth. So
What a
all of
great
that matters.
What a great point. I'm sorry, I just want to be mindful of time, and we have just had a flood of questions come through, and I want to make sure we give some time to answer questions and be able to answer some of these. So first, I'm just going to see here, going at the first one, do banks typically invest um, or grant under CRA guidelines every year? Is there a known cycle for these things? And is it
So
common in persistent poverty areas?
so generally, there are fewer banks in persistent poverty areas, and we're actually looking right now into how many CDFIs are in the areas which we're going to be sharing with your group as we look at that. Um, so, but it is an annual thing. It is, in other words, like let's take a national bank with Capital One. We would make our plans in the fall, as some of the programs that we had supported were winding down, or and then open up the cycle for grant making. For one, it's like a regular philanthropy, right? For the grant making piece. And I would also work with our national philanthropy, by the way, because when you're
Okay.
a good CRA officer, you're not just using the resources that you have in your little little bucket, but you're using commercial banking, you're using business banking, all the bank presidents, and of course the national philanthropy. So yes, and so we'd open up the process in about February.
Okay.
Sometimes it's by invitation. That's why these having them at the table is so important.
Sure.
Many times they're not just open, right? They have kind of real specific um, uh, time periods, and they open it up to people that in the community, organizations in the community that they have invited. So yeah, you'll have to get to know the banks and ask them directly, and you shouldn't be shy about asking that. That's what they're there for, uh, to provide access to through resources and to funding and financial services, of course. So don't be
Well,
shy.
I'm
And
hearing we should start the conversation now, get them in through the whole planning process unfolding through the next several months. And it
mhm.
sounds like that would easily tee them up for a next year proposal. Is that
Yeah,
sounding
and and
okay?
and and also they do have funds out of different pots sometimes, so
Okay.
bring them to the table and don't assume, but yes, you'll wanna know their cycle because that's where you're gonna have the best opportunity. But they're also, if they could fund a feasibility study, if you're needing to do a strategic engineering and feasibility study for your broadband plan for that county, uh, get like they did for FAR, fund that study, right? And it
Mhm.
makes such a big difference in your planning. So, getting to know them is the thing, and it's another group to include in your efforts, but well worth it, and it belongs to the people, so it's going to depend on the people to make it very, very relevant. And Sam, we'll
So,
try to put more examples on our
yeah,
website. Been
okay,
collecting a lot of examples, so we'll try to have
we can do
uh,
that.
mhm. And
Absolutely.
oh, and
We,
the NTIA had submitted a list of illustrative list of areas of digital equity that qualify for CRA, so that they could provide to banks and the regulators. And it came into it. It was adopted into the new rule. So we
oh,
have
fabulous.
specifics, and then we're going to try to develop more resources, right, and examples for banks and their
Yeah.
community partners. And all of this, just so people know, we're doing it for the nonprofits, for the community organizations that, and we're doing this to teach, and share knowledge and information, but we want you to use it. We depend on you to use it and take to the banks and take to the CDFIs to work with them and see how they can be great partners.
So I want to go, there's a couple more questions and we only have about 5 more minutes. So first one is, I'm completely new to this, so it's not surprising. I've never heard of this program, but it seems like a well-kept secret. If we reach out, should we expect a possible lack of interest? So I think there's that one, but I also want to say, you mentioned CRA loan officer. What is the person or the title people should be reaching out to? So is there like a certain person they should be reaching out to? And then what should they expect for a response?
So it's going to be different for different banks, right? They have their different setups, and certainly large banks operate a little differently. But I would say don't expect that there won't be interest. Expect that there will be interest. Now, of course, many of them might not be updated, right? They're thinking in the old paradigm of, oh, I finance affordable housing and small business, and that's it. They're they might be doing that. You might have to do a lot of teaching with all the resources that we and others, try to provide, and that you all are creating yourselves. So don't just because they may not know what you're talking about. We're working on that, and the agencies have committed to doing training and to engaging the digital equity community. So don't give up, and be like God, Senior Planet. There's several nonprofits that just grew really amazing with the support of banks, and they just took the materials that we provided and communicated their story, and and they it worked, and they've done great, and we'll put some of those examples
Yes,
on
speaking of
the
example,
website.
I'm wondering, do we have any templates or example CRA proposals that we could share with people? Do those exist? I know that they could be a little bit private. I don't know if there's any
Let
guide.
me find out, because I mean, because once you have applications, right, grant applications, which probably some entities will give you, something that they were successful in, like Senior Planet now was got so big that it was AARP, it became part of AARP. So they, going to some of them, the founders, and saying, could you show me how you did that? Maybe we could help facilitate too, now that you've asked the question. But there's that. And then there's, how did they come into this capital stack, right? That's usually community meetings with elected with economic development officials and CDFIs, and at the table trying to make it work. So it's a variety of pieces of information, but let me see what we can pull together. And
Oh,
also, you shouldn't hesitate to ask.
great. I know we only have a couple more minutes, so are there any final questions in the chat? I'm looking, I think we got a bunch. There's been a bunch of resources shared in the chat. I'm seeing some requests for how to contact people. There's been some great directory links that we've added. I think that's probably a great place to go. Are there any final questions? I'm gonna just look for the chat.
And maybe the next slide, and I think they'll
Yep.
receive this so that they don't have to worry about it, but the next slide, and maybe
Yes, this is
that
such a great report. Please go ahead.
Yeah, this will give you kind of a foundation in CRA without having to read the 700-page CRA. I mean, nobody does that. It's crazy. I mean, and they'll kill you, right? And the agencies don't mean to kill people and kill this amazing law with all those words, but they're trying to be as helpful as possible. But sometimes summaries, and they themselves have great summaries and stories, which we're going to pull together too, of communities that have done this. So
Yeah.
try not to get bogged down with the letter of the law and reading every piece of it, but the summaries that the Fed and others provide are awesome. And I think we're even more awesome because we try to put in regular language. At least I try to put in regular language, but don't let it kill it for you, because this is just about investing in their communities, and it's win-win for everybody.
I gotta
Um,
say that report that is up here, and we will send it out to those of you on our program. That really broke my mind wide open around CRA. It's just a fabulous report and so readable for those of us that are not part of the banking industry. So I appreciate that you contributed to creating this. And also the new blog on Connect Humanity's website. If you haven't seen it or read it, Jordana does an excellent job of going over the new rules that are going to be rolled out in April. So without further ado, I want to thank you, Jordana, for taking this time and walking us through. This is so much information. We could have easily taken 2 hours, I think, for this. But thanks for sharing with us today.
Thank you. Great to be here.